At, pre at present, coal are widely to be seen on the rise or dangerously back in fashion in Africa, as some countries such as Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Chad, Sudan, and Burkina Faso have experienced a series of successful and failed military takeover over the last 3 years. In Niger, the junta's justification for coup cites poor economic management and deteriorating security situation under Bazoum. Today, having a guest with me, Iman Ozomina, we will be speaking on socio-economic implication. We'll be right back after the break. I am Kike Lomo Okeri. Good evening. Welcome back. If you're just joining me, we are speaking on coup in Africa, the socio-economic implication. With me, I have Iman Ozomina, a public policy consultant. Good evening, sir. You're welcome to the show.
Yeah. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
How much adverse impact do coup have on Africa as a continent?
I think that question is like asking the obvious. Look at our neighbors, Niger. Since the coup happened a couple of weeks ago, the West African regional body, Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has already slammed a sanction. Nigeria as a country has gone on to cut off light to Niger, even though that cutting off of light is debatable because the agreements that Nigeria had with a tripartite agreement between Benin, Nigeria, and Niger was, look, we're not going to build a dam at our own end of River Niger, so that Nigeria, that is at the bottom of West Africa. Nigeria is at the lowest point in West Africa geographically, can have the capacity to build a dam at KNG. That was an agreement, but we've gone on to cut it off. I'm sure if you could, there are reports everywhere about lines and lines of vehicles waiting either to deliver goods and services in Niger. Niger is a landlocked country, so invariably the impact will be there.
Okay, sir. There have been talks about foreign interference in Africa economic and political affairs. Could you please give us a summary of this development?
The key thing is that at independence in the 60s, okay, independence started in the 50s, 1958, Ghana was opening the door for independence. By 60s, quite a lot of countries in Africa were independent, including Nigeria, Cameroon, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea. And by 1963, when the old OAU, Organization of African Unity, was set up, there were quite a lot of countries in Africa that were independent. Up till until 1990, when Namibia became independent. So now you have 54 African countries. Now the question to ask is, did the colonialists leave Africa, the colonial masters? If you ask me, the answer is no. They granted what some commentators or scholars call flag independence. Because if you have an independence without political power, without economic power, it's merely a flag independence. And that's what has happened across Africa. More so in what you call francophone Africa. It's mere independent because there's been in the public domain documents around the post-independent documents indicating that countries, the Francophone countries, must have a reserve in Central Bank of France. Central Bank of France can't get into any defense agreement with any country. French companies have a right of first refusal and all kinds of things. So that actually is not independent. Even if you look at what you call Anglophone Africa, it's still the same challenge, where you have British oil companies, British mining companies, and what have you, all across, having a commanding height in the economy. How much of local content do we have in African countries by Africans in the economy of Africa? So I think this is part of the root of economic instability and crisis in Africa.
Okay, how can the fundamental challenges of electoral process be tackled in Africa?
Incidentally, if you look at democracy in Africa, there are some theorists who are thinking perhaps what you call democracy is alien to the African traditional institutional governance. So what has happened is that Africa tries to grapple with liberal democracy, while the leaders in Africa behave like royalties. They behave like kings. In kingship, when someone is coronated a king, it's for life. So most leaders in Africa have that mentality, that they have just been inaugurated as kings, and that's why you have this constant alteration of the constitution to either get a third term, get a fourth tenure, or become a life president. And that's a huge, huge problem in Africa. In fact, if you look at in the last 20 years, last 2 decades, several countries in Africa have attempted, of getting tenure elongation. And that also has created a huge challenge. I mean, just Gabon, the other day, the president, Ali Bongo, amended the constitution and got a third tenure. Out there in Cote d'Ivoire, Alassane Ouattara amended the constitution, got a third tenure. In fact, that of Cote d'Ivoire is a little bit funny in that he had anointed a successor who incidentally died before the election. And the next thing President Alassane Ouattara did was simply to go to the parliament and twisted the parliament and got the constitution amended. So there's that crisis of governance across Africa. Mainly, triggered, the key trigger is one, the attempt to for leaders to perpetuate themselves in power, to ensure that they hand over to a trusted ally or an anointed candidate. And most of the times, this creates instability in the system. So the question to ask, does Africa have democracy? Does Africa appreciate democracy? I mean, your guess is as good as mine.
All right, sir. To what extent will sanction impact these school-ravaged countries, particularly in Niger?
Well, in my local language, they say whoever is holding another person down is also holding himself down. The question is this. Between Nigeria and Niger, I mean, there are about 7 states that are contiguous to Niger. They are on the border between Nigeria and Niger. Now, the question to ask, are there things that comes from Niger that we need in Nigeria? That's number one. Are there, if you ask me, I have worked in the agricultural sector. Since 2012, 48% of onion consumed in Nigeria are imported. They come from Mali, they come from Burkina Faso, they come from Niger, they come from West Africa. I remember attending a conference in Ghana on MIX. MIX is a marketing information services. MIX. So it's actually a platform that creates, that gives farmers opportunity of sharing information on pricing of commodities across availability and pricing. Now, I met farmers and farmer organizations who came from across West Africa. So what happened is that you have points where farmers meet and trade. So what has happened is that if you go across Kebbi, Sokoto, Jigawa, Katsina, Borno, Yobe, at the moment, you can imagine the impact, the economic impact on the part of Nigeria, and as well as on the other parts of Niger. So the simple, that adage of whoever is holding himself, another person down is also holding himself, meaning that the most impacted country in this sanction is Nigeria. I mean, you can talk to anybody from northern Nigeria. They will tell you the impact on their, I mean, there's a market, a big cattle market out there in Jigawa State, where in Jigawa, where at the border, where countries from across Africa come there to trade on cattle. So what it means now, you have closed it up. Do you know the impact? The impact is that very soon you're going to begin to see that cattle is going to be a big problem. Some commodities are going to be a big problem. So the impact is actually a double impact, both on Nigeria and Niger, and as well as other countries. But incidentally, in this case, Niger seems to have had some allies who are saying, look, we're going to work with you through this way. And that's also a big another issue to look at. But the point is that I hope this will be quickly resolved so that the ordinary people, both in Niger and Nigeria, can get a reprieve.
Oh, thank you very much, Iman Ozomina, a public consultant, a public policy consultant. Good evening. Join us same time tomorrow on the same station on an interesting topic. I am Kike Lomo Okeri. Good evening.